Hi, hiya. This is a follow-up to a video we did yesterday, looking at a new feature of NVivo 15, which was just released in the last few days, which is AI Assist and built-in AI large language module tools such as ChatGPT and Gemini. Now built in, all these platforms have their own, but this one is built into the software. So up to now, you could always work with public data like literature using something like ChatGPT. But there are ethical issues, obviously, with the primary data. And primary data, this has resolved that issue in the sense that, if it's writing, it's suggesting coding, or if it's writing summaries, that data is not instructing the model, which it would be with online like ChatGPT, and there's no data left on the server, none. So that takes care of the ethical issues, which means that you can now do the same things in app with primary data as you could with secondary. But today we're going to look at one particular task which I think make these tools stand out on their own, which is working with literature. So anybody working with larger data sets like literature, policy, surveys, they generally have it makes bigger challenges, and the tools for computer aided methods become much more important because you're trying to manage a much bigger data set. So this session is going to focus on the benefits of using and what these tools can do and their limitations for AI Assist in the context of doing a literature review, screening or synthesis. The data we're going to work with is the standard tutorial, but I've imported some literature around the whole environmental domain. But it's the standard tutorial environmental changes down east that comes shipped with NVivo. These files won't be in your copy, but if anybody wants a copy of the file that we've manipulated today, you can. We'll be putting up an email address. You can send me an email and we'll send it back to you. Just one caveat though, this is version 15. It's the brand new version, so you would need 15 to open it. NVivo is not backward compatible, it is forward compatible. In other words, I could open up a 13 or a 14 project in 15, but I can't open up the other way around. So, but it's there if you want it. The plan for today then is to walk you through. I've brought these particular documents in from Citavi, but it could have been EndNote, Mendeley, RefWorks, Zotero, just to show you the setup. Now we do have, I'll be referring to several videos. We will be making certain assumptions about this, or the video will be extremely long. We do have a separate video for how to correctly set up your literature review in NVivo. So that's looking at the mechanics of the kind of common mistakes that people make. So we're going to assume you've already watched that, and if you haven't, you should watch it first before you watch this one. We won't be explaining things like cases and classifications in the video, so you may have to look them up if you don't understand them. So the version is version 15. This would look pretty much the same interface wise as the previous versions, the previous two versions, and it would look pretty much identical in Windows and Mac. And the tools we're showing you for AI Assist are also available on the Mac, so no difference whatsoever there. So I'm going to walk you through the setup just to show you what we've done as an example, and then the first task I'm going to do is I'm going to get AI to summarize an article and attach that as a memo, which is a really useful thing to be able to do, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the problems with qualitative is having so much data. Now, if you've already got a pile of documents, and a good starting point might be to summarize those articles, and this will do it for you. So your time isn't spent trawling through pages and pages of text and writing summaries. The AI will generate that in a trustworthy way for you. You won't miss anything important. And those summaries will then be where you spend your time, in an intellectual pursuit, not in an administrative task, writing these things in the first place. And the two things it does very well, these large language models generally, not just NVivo, are writing summaries and suggesting descriptive codes. It can do both of those things very well, and we're going to show you both of those. And then I'm going to annotate a passage within a paper, just to show you that you can also summarize and annotate within a passage if you wanted to get clarity or reduction on a large passage of text. Again, we're not going to be going into the mechanics of memos and annotations, but they are extremely important tools in qualitative analysis, and we do have separate videos on those if you want them. And then we're going to do a text search, having done our data reduction. We're going to just take an example from our conceptual framework, which is pollution, and we're going to find all the paragraphs that mention pollution and put them into update an existing code. And then we're going to ask, having gathered everything at the top level, we're going to ask it to code on, to generate codes, the AI model to generate codes and actually put the quotes in, to break that down so we have a robust understanding of what these papers are saying about pollution. And then we're going to merge that data with the primary data where we've already coded for pollution, so that we can make direct comparisons then between the lived experience and the theory in the same code. Unlike the primary data, where I probably did have to go through a lot of it line by line, so I understand, the culture, the language, the nuanced things that matter with primary data when I'm coding for meaning. With literature, language tends to be much more consistent. Pedagogy is always pedagogy in literature, so I can generally find these paragraphs with queries, and we're going to show you an example of that. So having coded out the results, we'll merge that with primary data so we can do the comparison, and we'll report hierarchically on how much data has gone into these various codes, and we report by cross-referencing as well with metadata like year, author and discipline. So we get a more rounded piece of analysis on those articles, not just what they said, but how much of it they said, how old is the data, and who's talking about it, what disciplines are involved. So we can do that kind of analysis. So again, we have another video called Visualize Your Data with NVivo if you want to look at that more particularly for that kind of work. So the setup first, I've imported these 35 papers. You can see down the bottom here we have 35 papers. Sorry, I'll get a little spotlight going. We have 35 papers. You can see down the bottom here. So I know I have everything. They were imported from Citavi. Now we did them from Citavi because there's higher levels of integration between Citavi and NVivo. It automates a little bit more than the others, but you can import from any of the others, and there is integration between the others as well. Again, we have separate videos on the mechanics of extrapolating data from Zotero or Mendeley into NVivo and doing it properly. So we would just happen to use Citavi because it's got higher levels of integration. So there's my documents in, and if I go down now to my coding framework. So one of the areas that Citavi does that others don't do has an area called knowledge, where you would start to organize your snippets from the literature into these various themes or concepts. And when you do that in Citavi and you import your library, it creates a coding framework, a conceptual framework, or a thematic framework from the literature. So we've laid these out in the structure of our document the paper we intend to write, which is about environmental change, and there's the structure of it. So we've already set this up. Now again, that's an automated process from Citavi, but there's nothing stop you doing that manually from EndNote or any of the other referencing packages, or just bringing in the PDFs direct without going through any referencing software. Now you would have to attach the metadata if you wanted to use it, and you would have to set these up manually, but that can be done. It's no big deal. So that's our framework. And if you think about the process, what do you do in a literature review? You go through the literature, you develop themes and concepts of interest to the research questions. You then develop an instrument like a semi-structured interview schedule, focus groups, survey, whatever. You collect some primary data. You codify the primary data. You identify themes and concepts in the primary data. And you take all that straight back into dialogue with what you started out with in the beginning, which is your conceptual framework from literature. And then hopefully you can see whether there may be gaps in the literature or where the lived experience may be different, and the novel knowledge that you're bringing to your particular project. So that's already been set up. Now down here, we're not going to get into a whole thing about cases today, but we did make a set of cases from the literature. because it facilitates far more queries than if you don't do it. And that means that they're linked to the metadata. And we just kept it to 4. Now, when you import from the likes of Mendeley, you get a lot more metadata than that. We just deleted a lot of the dross, just kept the title, year, author, and reference type. You can choose whether to list by author and year or by title. I chose to list by author and year, but you could do it the other way around. Equally, you could have this information in an Excel document if you were bringing your PDFs in directly and you didn't have them in EndNote or whatever, and you could just import them and integrate them. Separate video for that one, but yeah, you can do that. Now, that means that's my database set up and my literature review is ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is write a summary. I want to attach a memo that summarizes these various articles. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to do AI Assist. Summarize the document. Now it gives me this dialog box. You can see I can do a short, standard or long summary. I'll do a long one just to get a bit more detail in there, and I'll generate it. And it's gone off now and it's writing that summary. So it'll give me a preview, if you like, down here of the summary. I should do this with this one. I'm not sure what's in that one. I'll just do it here just to have a better example, I think. There. So there's my summary written. And you'll find if you read it that it's pretty accurate. I just click here, add memo, and say OK. And when I do, it's job done. I've already just run this a minute ago on that particular paper, so let me you obviously, once it's done, the little link there, by the way, shows you that there's a linked memo. The little link symbol. I just switch off my annotations here. You can see that I have a full document here, and I can either right click on this and do open linked memo, or Control Shift and M, and that will open up the memo. So when you import from the likes of EndNote, you get the document, the PDF, but you also get the metadata attached automatically, and you get like the year, the author, and discipline, and you get a memo attached automatically with your abstract notes and keywords, depending on what you have, and they be coming directly from EndNote. And you also now have, it is now appended to that, this AI summary of what that paper is actually about. Now, you won't have time to read it now. We will make this available on a download, so if you wanted to read it in detail, but it is a pretty good summary of what's going on in that document. It's one of the things that these things do quite well. So obviously my first step in reducing the data from a massive big amount of articles is to get all these memos written that now give me summaries of those, which I can now search and code. And if in the course of that I'm actually reading the document as well, and I'm checking, or I'm doing, just doing some further coding or searching, and I come across a passage of text and I think that's interesting, but I need to get that into more simplified language or something that I can get my head around more easily later on. So I'm just going to select that piece of text, and I'm going to right click in the highlighted area and do AI Assist summarize just that passage, and it's going to do it. So I'll generate my summary. You see it'll be a much shorter summary because this is going to be an annotation. So if I say OK to that, the text will now be highlighted in blue like it is here. My annotations will be displayed. If I just switch, you can switch these on or off. It's a bit like a comment in Word. So I can see my two annotations here, and as I move from one to the other, if you keep your eye on this part of the screen here, as I move from one blue passage to another, the note is changing. So I can see, a kind of a summarized notes around this particular document, particularly our particular passages. The memo gives me the complete summary. This just gives me summaries of complete, maybe critical or very important passages in the document. Now, just so you know, if I'm reporting on this and I print it, I can include them. Just going to preview this so you can see that I can include my annotations, and I'll get my print preview. which I can now send off as a PDF or a Word doc. So you can see there's little numbers now beside my annotations. And down at the bottom of the document, you can see these notes, all numbered and hyperlinked back up to the relevant passages. So whoever I'm reporting to can see, the important passages, a summary of the overall articles, and the very important bits that I decided to just drill down on a little bit deeper. So far, I haven't done any manual work. It's all been thinking work that I'll be doing, because all the administrative tasks are being done for me. And let's say I've now reduced my data down, and I have all these little icons tell you there's a linked memo. I have all that done. Down on my Citavi code work, I now want to start populating this framework with actual data from those documents. So I'm going to use a text search. I'm going to pick this example, pollution, because I know there's not too much data in there. It'll run quickly and easily. And I'm going to search all those articles and update this pollution code. Then I'm going to ask AI to break that down into its constituent parts and make subcodes, refined codes that give me a handle on. The first query will tell me, gather everything they've said about pollution, but I don't know what they've said. The second one will actually code out what they're actually saying about pollution. So I'm going to go down here to the query criteria. Now again, we have separate videos on text searches, so I'm not going to be explaining the mechanics of this. I'm just going to write in to make a shopping list of anything that you think that we referred to in terms of resources. We can send you these by return. Pollution. I'm going to stem the search, so pollutes and polluting will also be found, and I'm going to tell it where to look. I'm going to tell it to look not in my interviews. Let's say I've manually coded those because I need to really trawl through those line by line. But when it comes to the lit, I can just scan them all. I'm going to do that, all 35 articles. And I can tell it, if you do find references to pollution, give me the paragraph. I could tell it to give me sentences or a certain number of data, words on either side. So I'll run that now and I'll get a preview of the result down below. And so these articles here, 5 of them or 4 of them have mentioned it. 5 paragraphs, 2 paragraphs, 5 again there, and 1. Now if I go into the PDF, you'll see a list of all these authors across the top. And if I go to the passages, anything that's highlighted here is talking about pollution. So as I go to the document, there's 2 in this one. If I scroll down until I find the highlighted passage, that's talking about pollution. Of course, I can always drill down on that as well and go back into the original document with one click and see the context from which that was taken if I want. So I'm happy now that I've found all the references to pollution. So I'm going to save this result and update my pollution code, my literature framework code, with these comments on pollution. So I'm going to save my result. I'm going to merge it into an existing code because Citavi has already generated my pollution code. I know this is an area I want to write about. So I'm going to select here and I'm going to go to my Citavi codes and I'll expand on my review and I'll tick the box for pollution, which means it's now going to populate that code with all those comments, and it's going to open the result. And there they are. So now up in my Citavi codes, we now have everything they said about pollution. Now I deliberately used that one because there's not a huge amount of data in there, but 4 of the papers of my 35 papers have mentioned it. That in itself could be a finding. And there's 13 different paragraphs discussing it. So now I'm going to ask AI to develop codes underneath that reflect whatever's going on in here. So again, if I click on this, I can either do AI Assist up here in the Home tab, or I can right click and do AI Assist Suggest Child Codes. I get a slightly different dialog box. I'm going to click Generate here, and it's now going to generate the codes, find the comments, and put them in. Which again would be a time-consuming, labor-intensive task if I were doing this manually. And there it is. So it's found, for example, 3 different references to ecological and socioeconomic importance of fish migration. And it's found degrading of a wetlands. It's found 4 comments in there, and there's the 4 comments. So I can choose to take 3 of those and reject another one, or I can take them all. So, wetlands, especially coastal salt marshes, have not fared better. So degradation of wetlands, you'll find, as descriptive codes goes, it can't do interpretive codes. It doesn't have your knowledge of the world under scrutiny. The culture, the language. It didn't do your literature review. It doesn't have your life experience, your knowledge. So it can't do anything beyond the descriptive. You will be going to more interpretive codes and maybe merging and collapsing these later also into broader themes. But for this kind of work, it'll do the job. So I'll say okay, and I'll tell it now to make those codes. So now I have all of these codes. And I can see now there's not a lot said about pollution, but when they do, they talk about challenges. And you see the way I can see the number of references here. If I sort on those high to low, I can see that the impact of polluted runoffs and the mitigation of the strategies to prevent that from happening, they're the dominant ones relative to the others. Obviously, it's a very small code, but you can imagine how important that would be if I have a large code. Now I cannot just look at the fact that only 4 articles mention pollution. I can tell you that this is what they actually said. So I now have a relationship between my coding thematic framework and the literature highly organized. And again, my time is now spent reading through these comments. I might make a visualization. I might want to show you, for example, the weighting of these codes relative to each other. It's not the absolute number I'm interested in, it's the relative number. But if I do, visualize hierarchy chart of codes, there's the different areas and domains that these articles combined talk about, and the size of the box will denote just how much it actually reports. And I can have that kind of a format or this kind of a format, or I can export it and do other formats as well. I'm also going to do something else with this now that I have it, because when we were coding the primary data, which is up here in the codes, we also discovered we developed a code around pollution and its impact on water quality, which is exactly what these documents are talking about. They refer directly to runoffs and water quality. So I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to go down here to my literature codes and I'm going to merge that in there. Now I have both my primary and secondary data that talks about pollution. If I open this up, the benefit here is that if I click on the text tab here, these are real people telling us about their experiences. If I click on the PDF tab, these are the authors who write about that same concept, what they said, both consolidated and in its full glory. And now I'm directly comparing the lived experience to the theory. I'm going to get brownie points just for showing that level of efficiency and integration between my primary and secondary data. And that is a really useful thing. I think it's a game changer, to be honest with you, in terms of analysis. So now I'm reporting in much more than just a summary of what people said about pollution. I can look at to what extent it was discussed, what are the key themes or domains that come up in that discourse. And of course I can also look at, is this old or up-to-date literature, or what disciplines are involved. So if I right click on pollution, this is because I have cases set up, and I do visualize by attribute value, and I select, and this time I want the literature metadata, I want the year. So I can see now, is this old, new, or I could do it for the volumes of data or the paragraphs. I'm actually going to do it for the number of documents. So I have 2 documents from 2008, one from 2010, and one that's more up to date at 2019. Of course, that could just reflect the general weighting of those documents in my overarching 35 documents. But if I go down here to my case classifications, and I go to the year, not just for those that talk about pollution, but for all of my literature review, this is what I have. So I've got documents ranging from 1982 all the way up to 2013. No, 2022 and 23. 7 articles from 2023. So I do have a span of years, but not when it comes to this pollution. A lot of it is outdated. Apart from this one paper in 2019, which is a few years ago, it's much older data that's in there talking about water quality and pollution. So all those kind of analysis are possible because we have cases and classifications. We've set up our literature review, and now with the advent of AI, these tasks that we would have done a lot more manually in the past would require a lot more thinking and writing are done for us. I've developed my literature framework, and I've got my summaries of my articles. I've also summarized passages of those articles, and I've updated my framework. I could build a complete conceptual or thematic framework from the literature without ever actually, by queries. And my time is then spent reading, attaching memos, summarizing, comparing, and reporting in those various ways that we've just done. It's a much more fulsome report than just a summary of what they said about pollution. So there you have it. That's the benefits for me in doing this. Particularly in literature, I think these tools will be very useful. So I hope that was helpful. We will put the email address up so you get to see if you want to ask me any questions or point at any of those resources we referred to about the more technical aspects, the mechanics of how I make cases with literature, that kind of thing. We have those. Or of course send me an email with a conceptual or technical question as well. And if you found this helpful, if you don't mind, please like and subscribe, because that pushes us up the algorithms. Okay, so till the next time, thank you.